The simple act of travelling is satisfying in itself, and we now have the technology to convey some of those satisfactions to others. Stories and journeys should have a structure. Beginnings and ends, and something in between. Sometimes we're just repeating what others have done before. The same story at a different time. This is one such journey.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go!
In June 2018, Michael Broadwith set out from Land's End to ride to John O Groats in the shortest time possible. That's something that's been going on since 1885. It still commands a lot of attention in the cycling world. In the past, it's something the general public have been interested in. The Australian Hubert Opperman took the record in 1934. There was enough general interest in that for a board game to be produced with his picture on the front. The game is essentially a version of Snakes and Ladders, which is fairly appropriate really. We can hear from Sir Hubert how the ride was organised.
From Land's End to John O Groats, when I started in July 1934, I had 250 people who at every crossroads, day and night, stood there and waited for me to go through. The system was that the Century Road Club with the Roads Records Association would telegraph or telephone ahead to those who had volunteered to be at the crossroads saying, at this stage Opperman is scheduled to start at 8 a.m. Tomorrow morning. And they would then work out what the impossible time would be, or rather the possible time would be, and then put an impossible time on it and be there at the impossible time so that they wouldn't miss you, and they'd wait for hours perhaps, and if the record was abandoned and you didn't start because of adverse winds or rain that had come up in the meantime, not rain particularly but the wind most importantly, they would then decide that you weren't coming, the record was outside your grasp, and they'd go home. And if they got another telephone call or another telegram, they'd come out again. Well, I had 250 of them that way.
In 2018 there were still people stood at junctions all the way up the route. We'd come out from home to film at a place called Bamber Bridge just south of Preston. We didn't have to stand waiting for hours though. We'd been following Michael on the internet, and that's accurate to within about 10 minutes.
Go, Michael!
We saw Michael when he'd just done over 380 miles in 17.5 hours, which is an average of 22 miles per hour. He's still got 455 miles to go to John O Groats. That means he's got another 20.5 hours, give or take, on the bike. If that goes to plan, he'll then set off to do another 160 miles to get the 1,000 mile record. The current holder of the Land's End John O Groats records is Gethin Butler at something like 44 hours, and he lives in Preston, the town we can see in the distance. He's been out tonight giving Michael some encouragement, which is something you need in an endeavour like this.
If all the mileage is on the computer were right, it was doing just over 22 up to somewhere like Warrington.
So what does that put him in terms of actually getting the record, do you think?
I mean, it depends what the second day is.
Yeah.
Still got a tailwind,
Yeah.
If you start getting bad weather,
Yeah.
you don't know what you're going to get at the top end.
And you just don't know how you're going to react.
I got thick fog for 84 mile and
I've been
winds off the sea, so it was like you knew you had a tailwind when you went inland and a headwind when you went back to the coast. It was.
But on those rollers, you can be banging out suddenly 400 watts or 500 watts by accident. And if you keep doing it to yourself, then you're making yourself, a bit of trouble for the future, really.
Well,
Mike, what do you want?
hey Damon.
how's it going?
Atmospheric enough for you?
Yeah.
Okay, I feel like I'm living the dream. Thank you so much.
How you doing?
Living it. All right. Yeah, I'm fine.
Don't need to lay on.
No, come on, let's crack on. What we look
Sorry.
No.
How's it going?
We're off. Go for it. Come on, Mike.
Keep going.
Go on, Mike. The guy who got this record was a bit of a ledge, you know. I've got to get on with it.
Well, he didn't look too bad, did he? He was doing the right thing, getting the hell out of here.
Yeah, can't blame him. I'll be honest, I would have stopped at the top.
And then it was decided to attack the 24-hour, the Lands and John O Groats and the 1,000 miles in one bite, which had never been done before. And actually, to attack the 24-hour as a starter wasn't wise, but one only had a limited time in England, and so we took the 3 bites at the Cherry.
The first major mark to hit was the 24-hour record. Crossing the Scottish border at Gretna left about 25 miles to achieve the 24-hour record.
So just above the 18 junction, in that little V. Yeah. 64. Right, and
Cool.
but that's the bit to remember, Steve. Stevenscroft Power Station and the cement works is 500 miles.
Okay, Stevenscroft Power Station.
So where that line is, you know you're at 500 miles.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
What's
and
the record?
The
It's
24 is 505 point something. Don't ask me the point. It's too early in the morning.
I thought it was 503.
I'm not going to ask you what the point is. I'm a great believer in YR.no, the weather forecasting site of the Norwegian broadcaster. And they're showing it, chucking it down until maybe about 4-ish, all the way up through here. Yeah, it looks like about 8.4 millimetre in an hour around Moffat.
The second 24 hours I must have got some bad meat in a sandwich, and because my stomach revolted, and I was vomiting off the machine. And at a place called Ecclefechan, 5 o'clock in the morning, I saw this doctor's plate, knocked on the door, and I said, look, I'm breaking the Lands End John O Groats record, I'm sick in the stomach. And he said, come in, and he laid me out on the table. I went promptly to sleep. He gave me some medicine, just try and soothe the stomach, and it did too. I wasn't nearly so ill, although I was weak.
Can I just have a 5-minute stop?
Really?
We could
No.
arrange it better. Boy,
Why do you need a 5 minute stop?
broken my handle.
Right, let's get some dry guys to get
Food as well.
what kind of food?
Like some savoury food and some soup maybe.
Soup is Chris and Jane, is it?
The big question that comes up is why so much tomato soup?
I don't know really. I think it probably just came about the first year because I think tomato soup's nice and easy to drink and it's quite comforting, and I don't mind it being cold. In fact, in Spain it's a bit of a delicacy, isn't it?
Gazpacho.
Yeah, gazpacho. So no, it's just been a tradition, I guess. I mean, it worked the first time, and if something works, why change it? I suppose is the answer.
You're doing a grand job, man.
It was considered that if you're doing a thing, as with the record on the Melbourne Motordrome and the Lands End John O Groats, that it had to be done to get the maximum speed from the rider. And anything that could be done by anybody else should be done. Because immediately you're ahead of a record, you're not racing the other man anymore, you're racing the fellow who's going to come after you. Even when you had a record well in hand, you still put your head down and pumped your legs as fast as you possibly could.
That rain, bloody hell!
I don't think I've seen rain like that. Maybe a couple of times in my life, but that was about as bad.
I was riding along the A9, unable to look forwards in puddles of deep rain.
For almost all the ride, Michael was ahead of his schedule. But the climb to the pass at Democta changed that. It was a long, grim slog, and it was a time that the ride was most in doubt. I knew that the forecast was for better weather beyond Democta. By the time Michael passed Aviemore, it was fairly clear. But what were the effects of all that rain and cold? There's a specific medical condition that comes with long-distance cycling. After 600 continuous miles, your neck muscles can give out. It's called Sherman's neck, and it means you can't keep your eyes on the road ahead. People try to come up with many solutions to this condition, but it's not easy.
So how does this appliance work then? Has this been thought out before? Or?
So this has been generously donated at the last minute by those from Raigmore Hospital in Inverness.
So it's an actual orthopaedic thing?
It is fresh from A&E. They're hoping that if they provide this, they won't see him later.
Which of the many people is actually qualified to apply said device?
This is your average sort of first aid.
Actually, I've done spinal injury training.
I have had a quick briefing from a nurse.
Oh. You actually consider how few people have done this over so many years, and then you get the enormity of the task.
Well, no. Interestingly, I think the fascinating thing is that so many people have done Land's End John O Groats, but very few have done it at such an insane speed. So people can, grasp what the task is because they've done it frequently. I mean, I've done it,
I mean, to me, this is a real leveller. It's no longer a look at aerodynamics and positions, wind tunnels. This is about, can you survive this? How hard is this going to be? And it's really hard. I've just never seen anything like it. Mike! Here!
The true test of any support team is how it copes with the unexpected. We've already been convinced of the powers of tomato soup. It's a tried and tested component of success. The neck brace from Raigmore Hospital was more of a shot in the dark. Sherman's neck is a very rare condition, but strangely it's one I've encountered quite a bit.
I've tried all manner of things with people, and at the end of the day, what determines it is the willpower of the person who's doing it.
Yeah.
If they want to find a way to finish, they will find a way to finish.
It doesn't matter whether you do Land's End to John O Groats in a month or a week or in 2 days, you're still making that same journey. I love cycle touring, and I often say to people the only reason I race is because I don't have time to go touring. The reality is, if you're doing a 24 or if you're doing the transcontinental, stuff will go wrong, and it's how you deal with what goes wrong, and those periods when you're struggling, how you deal with those is in the end what affects the outcome of the race. And I guess that's similar even to cycle touring, isn't it? If you go on a long cycle tour, stuff goes wrong, and you need to be laid back and flexible and adaptable enough to take it in your stride. So, what's nice about this event for me is that my friends and family can come and help out. My mum's here, my mother-in-law, my best mates, and that was similar to the end-to-end. My crew's entirely made up of friends and family, it always has been, and I enjoy that they enjoy that experience and that they share that moment with me.
I'm not sure of this, but I think that I was the only rider in England that has held the 5 unpaced records, the Land's End John O Groats 1,000 miles, 24 hours, and the London York and the 12 hours in the one season. And I was the recipient of England's highest honour, the Bid Lake Memorial Prize.
Yeah, come on, Mike! Come on, Mike! Come on!
Come on, Mike, dig him!
Whoa! Come on, Mike! Come on, Mike! You can do it! You're going to do it! I know it! Come on! Come on, you're going to do it!
But in retrospect, it wouldn't have been possible unless English cycling had turned out to give that voluntary help to me, and the only reward that they had was a letter of thanks for me. I couldn't possibly meet them. I got to John O Groats with the record well in hand, slept for 4 hours, and then went off to the 1,000 miles as well.
I'm not doing 1,000.
We did want to encourage you anyway. Thank you, Michael.
To be honest, I'm really disappointed.
Well, no.
You're a star, mate. Thank you so much. You saw me in a few weak moments there.
I did.
Unofficially, he's hammered
Joker.
the British record.
Where's that man John Pick? Come here, fella. I promised you I'll do that for you.
Thank you, Michael.
Enjoy that. What a grand day out. Well, thank you so much. As I said to you, your enthusiasm from the start has bowled me over, so I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I suspect you've got quite a lot of baby care in there as well. Yeah. Come over to the camera, man. Come to the camera.
43, 25, 13.
I hear John was criticising your lack of pedalling downhill.
Really?
Yeah, freewheeling.
Freewheeling.
Cheeky blighter.
Well, I should put you on fixed wheel, that's what I would do to you.
The map from the 1930s board game is interesting. The coastal inlets are shown bigger than they are. I think that's an Australian's view of Britain. They came here by sea, and it took a long time. So time and distance held few fears. John O Groats may be the end of the road, but a ferry leaves from there for Orkney. John O Groats isn't actually the most northeasterly point of Britain. That point is the nearby Duncansby Head, with its spectacular sea stacks and seabird colonies. Filming seabirds like this fulmar reminds me of filming long-distance cyclists. Recording their behaviour when they're still is pretty easy, and we can identify with what they're doing. But these fulmars are small albatrosses, so most of their lives is spent far out at sea travelling huge distances, which is the bit that we don't often get to see. I like to delve into the background of subjects. In 1930s Britain, professional cycling was place-to-place records. The record breakers were the stars of the day, and they sold bikes. BSA were a huge conglomerate which made motorbikes, and cars, and bicycles. Raleigh were their main rivals, and made the most bikes in the world. Raleigh also made the Sturmey Archer gear, which they promoted heavily through the record breaking. Raleigh's man was Sid Ferris, who retook the record in 1937. He was a one-eyed vegetarian whose eye patch gave him a piratical look. Opperman's proudest moment had come in 1931.
But in the back of my mind all the time was not the Tour de France, it was this Paris-Brest-Paris, which is held only every 10 years, and was being held for the 5th time. Naturally, I regard, and despite any records I've broken since, even the ride across Australia, I regard as the pinnacle point of my pedalling existence, and represented everything that I'd worked for, because my forte was long distance cycling, and that was the longest ride in the world. It was in competition, it wasn't in a record breaking where no one else was there, it was against competition, and so I regard it as the top-notch event of my cycling life.
In 1931, Paris-Brest-Paris was a race and also a randonnée. The race is no longer scheduled, but the randonnée has 6,000 participants. There's still a lot of prestige in being the first home on PBP. So it looks very much like a race, one that lasts for at least 42 hours or so, and which goes on day and night for up to 90 hours. In 2015, people came from 66 countries around the world. It's the biggest thing of its type by a long way. And it's happening again this year.